Hello. Wanted to welcome you to our conversation with immigration attorney David Leopold on DACA immigration and legal rights. We really hope you enjoy the presentation. My name is Maria Luisa Bates. I am a incoming third-year pre-law student majoring in political science and economics, and I will be co-moderating this session. I'm the recruitment chair for Define American, which is a UDC organization committed to sparking dialogue and advocacy efforts around identity and immigration on and off campus.
And good afternoon. I am Robert Solomon. I'm the Vice President for the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity here at CASE. I'm honored to moderate this session with Maria Luisa. But we want to also give thanks to our co-sponsors, the Office of Multicultural Affairs, the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, where I sit, the Center for International Affairs, the Undergraduate Diversity Collaborative as well. We won't spend a lot of time because we do want to get to the main event, and that is Mr. David Leopold, who is our speaker today. David is the group leader of the immigration law group at the law firm of Ulmer and Berne. Mr. Leopold has been widely recognized for his work on immigration law and policy. In addition to his full-time immigration, visa and citizenship practice, Mr. Leopold serves as an immigration policy consultant and counsel to DHS Watch, a project of America's Voice. He is the former president and general counsel of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the premier bar association for immigration lawyers and professors in the United States. And he has also received AILA's 2012 Edith Lowenstein Memorial Award for Excellence in Advancing the Practice of Immigration Law, and has been named by ABC News to Univision as one of the top immigration experts to follow on Twitter. We could probably go on and on with all the accolades of the wonderful things that David has done, but two of the most important things is he is one of our own, Case Western law alum, and also he is incredibly generous with his time and sharing his wisdom with his alma mater. So with that, I will welcome David to begin his presentation before we have questions.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Maria Luisa. It's wonderful to be here. These are tough times, so I know a lot of folks have a lot of questions. So I thought what I would do is kind of go through an outline of what's happening with respect to DACA, and then generally immigrants' rights and undocumented immigrants' rights. And happy to entertain whatever questions you folks might have on any topic related to immigration, or actually anything else, whatever you want to ask me, I'll answer within reason. So let me get started. So, okay. All right. So everybody knows that there was recently a court decision, the Supreme Court of the United States issued a decision on DACA in mid-June. So what did the court decide? And first of all, just make sure everybody knows what DACA is. DACA is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. And that's the program that was put in place by Barack Obama when he was president in 2012. And what that program does, it invites certain undocumented youth to apply for what we call deferred action. People who came to the country at a certain age, had been here a certain amount of time, were under a certain age, and had relatively unscathed criminal histories. In other words, no criminal history. And those folks could apply for what we call deferred action, which is it's a law enforcement mechanism by which the federal government agrees not to enforce the law and to provide, upon a showing of economic necessity, in other words, the need to work, lawful work authorization. And DACA was a game changer for a lot of undocumented youth. We call them dreamers, because it allowed them to go to school, finish high school. It allowed them to go to college and graduate school. It gave them Social Security numbers and the ability to work and earn their way through school, and in some cases, get aid. So it really was a game changer. And what happened was when the Trump administration came into office in in January, there was a lot of pressure on Trump to withdraw DACA. And he did it. In September of 2017, he had then Attorney General Jeff Sessions announce that DACA was illegal with no other reasoning, and they withdrew it. Courts immediately were full of lawsuits all over the country. Ultimately, the courts enjoined or stopped President Trump from ending DACA, and it went to the Supreme Court, which decided that the manner in which the president had tried to end DACA violated the law. I won't get too technical, but what the court decided was that they didn't follow the proper procedures in how they rescinded DACA. But importantly, the court did not make a decision up or down on whether DACA was legal or not legal, or whether it was good policy. And I put up a quote there from the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, who wrote the opinion in the DACA case. And he's made it really clear. We don't decide whether DACA is good or bad. We just decided that the government needs to follow the rules when it revokes DACA. That's what they decided. So it left open the ability of the Trump administration to again try to revoke DACA. And what did the court's decision mean? Well, the decision of the Supreme Court, put DACA back to where it was before the Trump administration tried to withdraw it. And that means that at that point, not only can people who have DACA renew DACA, and they can renew in increments of 2 years. Many of them have been doing that all the way through because the lower courts enjoined the Trump administration order to withdraw DACA.
David, while you're working on getting the screen back up, was the legality of DACA one of the questions that was presented to the Supreme Court when it made the decision?
So the question was, I think, Robert, you asked whether or not they consider the legality of DACA itself. In the Supreme Court's decision, they did not. It was purely on the administrative question, whether or not it violated the Administrative Procedures Act and the way that it was withdrawn. The lower courts, in some cases, did consider it, but nobody ever squarely ruled on whether DACA itself is legal. And that's actually, Robert, an important question, because there is a lawsuit that is pending right now in Texas before Judge Hainan, and he is a judge that ruled that DAPA, the successor to DACA, when Barack Obama tried to expand DACA to parents, he's the judge who ruled that it was violative of the Administrative Procedures Act. And it's pretty clear that Judge Hainan, Andrew Hainan in Brownsville, Texas, is no friend of DACA. But it's winding its way through the courts. And so that is something we don't know. We don't know whether he will ultimately rule that DACA itself is illegal. And the claim is essentially that DACA is beyond the president's power. The president does not have the power to grant benefits to a massive group of people. That's essentially what the argument is. So we'll see what happens with that case. But that's a good question, because no, they didn't rule on the underlying legality of DACA. What they did say, as you can see in the slide here, at the last point, is that in order to withdraw DACA, the Trump administration had to give a reasoned explanation for doing so. By reasoned explanation, it gets very complicated, but the bottom line is they have to rationalize the withdrawing of DACA against what we know about DACA, which is that it gave a lot of people jobs, a lot of people were relying on it, a lot of families were relying on it, a lot of employers were relying on it. And for the Trump administration to just simply say, oh, sorry, it's illegal, wasn't enough according to the Supreme Court. Now, the import of the Supreme Court's ruling is that they do have to accept new applications. The federal government does, Department of Homeland Security. Problem is they're not doing that. As of today, the USCIS is refusing to accept new applications, and at least one federal court in Maryland ruled last week that the federal government must accept new applications. And this is important because the lower courts up through the Supreme Court did not allow new applications to be processed. So that left a lot of folks out in the cold. Ever since 2017, no new DACAs have been processed. So many folks, many young immigrants are unable to get DACA. The Supreme Court has said that now they can, but the Trump administration has heretofore refusing to accept those applications in direct violation, I should say, of the Supreme Court's order. So we'll see where that goes. So what's next? Well, the Trump administration can withdraw DACA. They have the right to do that. Supreme Court said they did. We all knew that they did. That was no surprise. But they have to give a reasoned explanation, like I said before. So what's the real future of DACA? The Trump administration could conceivably withdraw it tomorrow. And frankly, many of us are waiting on pins and needles. Many DACA recipients are. Many of you who are watching this are. We'll have to wait and see what the Trump administration decides. Could almost guarantee to you that if and when they do that, there will be litigation that follows. So we'll have to see where that goes if it happens. But what's the real future of DACA? It depends on what happens in November. Depends on whether the president is reelected or whether Vice President Joe Biden is elected president, because the two have very different views. President Trump has made his views clear. He wants to get rid of DACA. He wants to put DACA recipients, dreamers, on a pathway to deportation. Biden has said that he will keep DACA and he will expand DACA if he can. So very different views. So we'll know more, obviously, in November. Okay, now, if you are a DACA recipient or if you know somebody who's a DACA recipient, it's really important to think about your rights as a DACA recipient or even as an undocumented immigrant and your obligations. First of all, it's critical if you're a DACA recipient to carry your DACA ID, which is your work authorization card, or at least a copy of it with you. If you get encountered by immigration, they will typically back off if you can show that you're a DACA recipient. If you don't want to carry your card because you're afraid you might lose it, at least carry a copy of it. And if you don't want to do that, at least have your A number, your alien registration number with you so that can be quickly plugged into a computer. A couple things to remember, and this goes not only to DACA recipients, but to all immigrants and actually all US citizens, but today we're talking about immigrants. You have rights. You may not have proper immigration documents, or you may be dependent on DACA, but you are covered by the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States protects all persons. And I could do a whole presentation on what those rights are, and I can quickly run through them. Of course, if you are encountered by law enforcement, you do not have to talk to anybody. You have the right to remain silent. Citizen or not, you have the right to remain silent. If you want to remain silent, the best thing to do is say so out loud. I do not wish to speak. I wish to remain silent. You do not have to let anybody into your house, come knocking at the door, unless they have a warrant. And a warrant is a warrant that's signed by a judge, a judicial warrant. Typically, when immigration comes to somebody's house, they will have what's called an administrative warrant. Those are not worth the paper they're written on for purposes of entering somebody's home. They will tell you that they have a warrant, tell them to slip it under the door. Do not open that door if you do not wish to create a situation where they could come in, because once that door is open, all kinds of exceptions, legal exceptions might apply, which would allow them to enter. If you're not under arrest, and you have the right to leave. So example, if you're sitting on a bus, a Greyhound, which we know that Customs and Border Protection typically get on Greyhound buses up and down the Ohio Turnpike, and they will check identification. If you're sitting there and you don't have identification or you're undocumented, you do not have to say anything. You can quietly get up to leave, get off the bus. And if somebody says to you, you need to sit down or show me your ID, you say, am I under arrest? Because at that point, they have to have what we call probable cause or reasonable suspicion to say yes. And if you're just there, it's very difficult for them to articulate why they would want you to stay there. Can't be because you have brown skin. It can't be because you have an accent. It can't be because you, quote unquote, look illegal. So it's important to know those rights. It's a lot easier for me to sit here in, privacy of my home and tell you this. When you're out there on the front lines and it happens, it's much more difficult to actually say, man, am I free to leave? So you need to sort of practice that if you are worried that you're going to find yourself in that situation. If you are arrested, you do not have to say anything to anybody. You have the right to talk to a lawyer at your expense if it's an immigration arrest, but you do have the right to talk to a lawyer. And remember, as a non-citizen, you do have constitutional rights. If this type of thing happens, the best thing to do, of course, is always to remain calm and polite. Don't get angry. Don't interfere with what the police or immigration is doing. That's obstruction. Don't lie. If you're going to talk, you shouldn't talk. But if you do talk, don't lie. Don't give false documents. And what you also should do is have a plan. Tell a lot of folks it's best to have a plan in advance. And I know many of you may have parents who don't speak English or, are not going to be able to sort of in the moment when somebody's banging at the door, think about what to do. What a lot of folks do, what I've advised them to do, is put a list of the rights in your native tongue on the front door, so that when your mom or your dad or your grandmother is standing there and the door is being knocked on, they know they don't have to open it. They know that they don't have to talk, et cetera, et cetera. That's having a plan. It's always good to know, where your documents are, to designate a family friend or somebody who can find them for you if you are arrested. How are you going to retrieve your documents? And again, you should sit down with your family. Obviously, many of us are Zooming with our family these days, but sit down with your family and go through what would happen in the event of an arrest or the event that immigration came to visit the house unannounced. It's really important for people to know their rights. And if they do come in, if immigration does come in, notwithstanding your refusal and notwithstanding the fact that they don't have a warrant, obviously you can't obstruct their entry even if you think it's illegal, but what you can do is record it. What you can do is get the identification of the officers, and what you can do is file a complaint, a written complaint, if you feel rights have been violated. Okay, now, since the murder of George Floyd and others, and the massive protests that have occurred across the country, a lot of folks are out there in the streets, and that's a good thing. America is about First Amendment. America is about protest, and that's how we get things done in many ways. But non-citizens, all immigrants, all undocumented immigrants, all DACA recipients, again, like I said at the outset, are covered by the Constitution. You have the right to free speech. You have the right to protest. You have the right to assembly, all of that. But you also have the obligation to follow the law. And even though the Constitution applies to you, it does not protect you if you commit a crime, if you are involved in violence or you're involved in anything. Now, look, you don't have to be involved in a crime to get arrested. And all you need to do is turn on the television and see what's going on in Portland, Oregon, and what they're threatening to do in other cities to understand that the Department of Homeland Security has been involved in a lot of this quote unquote law enforcement. So if you are an immigrant or you're a DACA holder, you need to be extra vigilant, because if you get arrested, it could be grounds under certain circumstances to revoke your DACA. So I'm not saying don't protest. I'm not saying don't become involved. It's a great thing to do. It's an important thing to do. What I'm saying is be careful. And remember that whereas a U.S. citizen gets arrested, you have the same rights, but you also are responsible for your immigration status, and you're also more vulnerable on civil immigration ramifications. So keep that in mind. DACA is not a right. DACA is a matter of discretion. It's what we call an act of grace, of government grace. They don't have to give it to you. They can revoke it. It's a matter of discretion. And as you're not entitled to it for the 2 years that they give it to you, they can revoke it. They can revoke it if you get arrested for DUI or if you're involved in some other activity. So you need to be extra vigilant. Again, the Portland example is a chilling reminder of some of the things that are happening out there in terms of government, quote unquote, law enforcement. And I think immigrants or DACA holders, and especially undocumented immigrants, need to be extra vigilant. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears. I can answer questions about DACA and so on and immigrants' rights in a second. I thought I would talk a little bit about the various bans that are out there. Since the advent of COVID, the president has issued a number of entry bans. Many of you know, he'll remind you every time he talks that it started with China. But since then, it went to Iran, the European Schengen area, which is most of what we call Western Europe, and Sweden, Norway, Iceland, and UK. You're banned if you're not a citizen of the United States, not a permanent resident, and you've been in those areas, you're banned from, under the current proclamations, for coming into the United States for 14 days. So if you've been in Europe, you can't come here within 14 days of that visit. You'd have to sit it out in a third country that's not subject to the COVID ban. Ironically, we're now banned from going there because COVID is actually much more of a hot spot in the United States than it is in many of these countries. Now, who don't they apply to? These bans do not apply to people who have green cards, lawful permanent residents. They don't apply to non-citizen spouses of US citizens or green card holders. They don't apply to siblings, brothers and sisters of US citizens or lawful permanent residents, assuming both are unmarried and under the age of 21. And there are certain exceptions, the most prominent of which is the national interest exception. If you're coming to the United States for something in the national interest, then the ban won't apply. Now, recently, the Department of State, and this is the second point here in this PowerPoint, issued an advisory that students traveling from the Schengen F1 students, that's the student visa, and M1 students, that's the trade school visa, traveling from the Schengen area of Europe, the UK and Ireland with valid visas are not subject to the ban. That was posted last week on the Department of State website. This does not apply to students who are coming as exchange visitors on J visas. And I put the short URL up there if you want to write that down, or maybe we'll make the PowerPoint slides available to you. That's where that advisory is. So there are certain exceptions to the ban. And there are also exceptions for healthcare professionals, people with H-1Bs and intercompany transfer visas who are coming in. So we're almost at the bottom of the hour. And that's really all I have in terms of slide presentation. But I am here to answer your questions and happy to do so. Sorry about the technical slowdown earlier on, but that's part of the fun of live presentations.
So to start off the questions, is there going to be a likely new approach that we will be taking towards DACA?
Well, it depends. I mean, if President Trump is reelected, then the likely approach is that DACA will end at some point. They're going to articulate something which is going to justify their refusal to keep DACA out there. And at some point they will withdraw it, I would imagine, in the 4 years that follow his reelection. If Joe Biden is elected president, and assuming that DACA doesn't get struck down in the courts is in and of itself illegal, then that administration has already committed. Biden has already committed on his webpage, his campaign site, to not only reinvigorate DACA, to bring it back, but to expand it. And how they will expand it, well, the details aren't there. I will tell you that as somebody who's worked on DACA and so on, there are some pretty good ideas of ways to expand it. You could expand the work authorization. You possibly could expand the age. People who qualify based on age. You could possibly expand the number of years in which DACA is granted. So there are ways, and those are being looked at, I would imagine, right now by the Biden people. So it really matters who gets elected president in terms of what DACA could look like. And, you know, the other thing is this: DACA is not an answer. None of us ever thought DACA was an answer. What's an answer here is legislative reform. Congress ultimately is going to make a decision, hopefully. You know, for the last 15 years, they have not been able to pass a bill that they can send to the president. The House at times has passed bills. The Senate at times has passed bills. The last bill to pass on immigration reform, which accounted for DACA, was in 2013. And that never made it past. That was by the United States Senate. That was a bipartisan bill, which did all kinds of things to reform the immigration system and give a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, improve the numbers for legal immigration, for people who are waiting in line. Those of you who are from India or China know that there's severe backlogs that affect those countries, and that's something that hopefully will be addressed. But ultimately, the decision about DACA, or relief, I should say, for undocumented immigrants and undocumented youth, is going to come from Congress. It has to. It has to be legislative. And that's the way, you know, because look, Joe Biden could get elected in November. All right, so we're good for another 4 years. And then what? Supposing somebody who doesn't like DACA is elected in 2024 or in 2028 or whatever it is. And it's hard, you can't have people living in this sort of, nightmare where one day their rights can be withdrawn. So ultimately, hopefully Congress will make a decision on this that'll put it in the laws, and nobody will be able to play with it.
That would be great. I said, I have a question from the chat, and the question is, what about advanced parole? Can recipients start applying for it, and under what grounds can they use advanced parole?
Well, that question, advanced parole, let me explain what the question means, so the people may not understand it. When DACA was first issued, it provided that people could use advanced parole, and advanced parole is a document that says in advance, if you leave the United States, we will allow you to come back in. It's why it's called advanced parole. And parole means they'll parole you into the United States. And DACA recipients originally were able to use that. There was some advantage to it. There were some technical advantages to it. When Trump came into office, that was one of the first things they got rid of, was the ability for DACA folks to use advanced parole. They just weren't granting them. So we're back to square one with the Supreme Court decision. So theoretically, they should issue advanced parole to DACA recipients. Will they? I can't tell you right now, because they're not even taking new applications. They're not even following the Supreme Court's decision. They're kind of ignoring it, which is completely outrageous. I would say that, again, I wouldn't rely on advanced parole until after the election, when we'll know better who is going to be in charge on January 20th. If it's a Biden administration, I think that there will be moves toward allowing advanced parole again. So that's the best answer I can give you. The answer is, at the moment, technically, yes, it should be available. Is it available? No. The long-term life of the advanced parole, the ability to travel for DACA recipients, is really what it is. Depends on who wins the election, in my opinion.
Does this decision have an impact on universities?
Of course. First of all, universities have been through the mill over the last 3-4 weeks. Many of you may know that what happened 3 weeks ago was that the administration, when everybody went home on Zoom, the administration, those of you who are F1 and M1 students know this, you can only take a limited amount of online classes. I think it's 3 credit hours or 1 course per semester. And that rule was relaxed with the stay-at-home orders. The Department of Homeland Security said, okay, we get it. People can't go to class. We're not going to enforce that rule for now during the COVID. We're going to allow you to take full-time online classes. What they did in June was they said something like, by the way, everybody has to come back in the fall. If you're not here in person, we are not going to allow you to participate in CBIS, which is the program, the Department of Homeland Security program that documents or tracks foreign students, F1 students. And it was horrible. A lawsuit was filed and the government backed off. So that's, they're going to allow now online classes because they gave up their attempt not to. But that kind of gives you a sense of where this administration comes down. It's not this administration, and I'm not trying to be partisan here. I'm just relaying the facts. This administration has done whatever it can do to make it more difficult for universities, for students. They use this program clearly to force universities to reopen, to have in-person classes. The reason they had to back down is because it wasn't just the reopening for the students. You had to have janitors in there. You had to have teachers who may be vulnerable, professors who may be vulnerable to COVID. There were all kinds of things that obviously were not considered, and they did have to back down. But that does tell you that when they can restrict the rights of students or universities to have students, they'll do it. Don't ask me why. I mean, the foreign student program brings to the United States $44.7 billion a year in revenue. It is a major, major component of university education in this country. And foreign students bring to this country new ideas, fresh outlooks, culture, and contribute. I mean, they contribute in so many different ways, and many of them end up staying here and contributing even more. It's been a marvelously successful program over the years. And again, I think it'll continue because it has to continue. I think that if we do have a new administration, I think we'll see some good things. I think it'll be expanded in many ways. But yes, I mean, DACA does help universities because it allows them to register DACA students. It allows those students who, listen, most of the students who have DACA, they're as American in culture as any one of us that have been born here. Imagine if one day, if you're a citizen, okay, you were born here, and imagine somebody came up to you one day and said, hey, by the way, you're not a citizen. And by the way, you have no right to be here. In the way you think now, okay? It would be dumbfounding. I mean, what would somebody said to you one day, okay, well, you're actually a citizen of Antigua and that's where you've got to go. You have no concept of it. That's what this is all about. These are people who brought here at a very young age. They're American in every way, except for they don't have the right paperwork. And that's not their fault. That's the fault of a system that needs to be reformed. And that's really what DACA as a temporary measure is trying to solve. So these young adults, these adults do have the right to go to school, should have the right to go to school and contribute like anybody else who's raised in this country. So yes, DACA does benefit tremendously, not only immigrant youth, but universities. It benefits the economy. It benefits healthcare. 25,000 DACA recipients are frontline fighters in the COVID-19 battle. 25,000 or 27,000. My number may be low. DACA recipients are on the front lines of food distribution, on the front lines of IT, of construction, and other undocumented workers. All of these industries are industries that are essential. We call them essential workers now. Before COVID, they would refer to the non-citizens who had no documents and toiled in the fields as illegal aliens. Now they're essential workers. Those in the meatpacking plants, those who are feeding us as we hunker down at home or as we come out and try to get back to work. Those are the ones who've been keeping the grocery stores full. So we've learned, sometimes there are silver linings, and it's hard to find a silver lining with this awful pandemic that's threatening so many lives and taking so many lives. But, we've seen, I think America has seen how essential many of these undocumented workers are, not only to our economy, but to our health and our well-being.
Yeah, in fact, David, wasn't that a part of the amicus briefs that went to the Supreme Court that talked about the adverse economic impact to the U.S. that where DACA would cause, that we would not be prepared to do that in any way?
That's absolutely correct. And that's one of the reasons that the Supreme Court said that the Trump administration did not justify the withdrawal. They couldn't just withdraw it under the law. They had to justify the withdrawal. And as you point out, Robert, with economic benefits like DACA has proven since 2012, when it came into inception, what was the justification?
Yes. I'd like to double back. There's a chat question that I wanted to share, and it relates to taking the online courses. And the question is, what about students who are still outside the U.S. and want to apply for a visa as soon as the U.S. Embassy allows? Mm-hmm. Students still enter the U.S. and take a full online semester? Yeah,
they can. The rules remain relaxed. What the ICE had said was, look, if you're not taking all online courses, you don't need to be here. That's why we're not going to relax the rules. They backed off of that. So students can come to the United States. They should be able to get their student visas. One of the problems is the embassies either, in many cases, are not open or are not, scheduling appointments that quickly. But I will tell you, students who have start dates, what they should do is, if they have an I-20, and that's the form that's issued by the university, if they have an I-20 showing a start date that is before the visa appointment, if they can get one scheduled, that constitutes an emergency under the Department of State's own guidelines. So they should be able to get an earlier appointment. And as I understand it, as of yesterday, places like London and other places, they were beginning to schedule these appointments. So if you are overseas and if you are trying to get an appointment scheduled, go to the embassy website and see what the latest is, because some of it changed yesterday in terms of scheduling, and you should try to get your appointment scheduled as soon as possible. It doesn't matter that you're going to be coming to an all online program. Those rules still remain relaxed, and so you should be able to come here.
And we have another question from the chat. How can CWRU support DACA recipients?
Well, doing what they're doing right now, for example, providing information, providing education. I think, for the last 3.5 years, my experience is that CWRU has been very concerned and very out front about supporting its DACA students. That's just been my experience, and looking at every way that they can do it in terms of security, in terms of making them feel welcome, making them understand that they are welcome, in terms of providing, access to education, know your rights, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, all of us can support DACA students, and I think the university has done a tremendous job doing that. Ultimately, though, Congress has got to support DACA recipients. Congress has got to pass a law with a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, and hopefully for their parents as well, and for other undocumented folks who have long ties to this country, that give them a pathway to earn their way to citizenship. People a lot of times think of this as somebody wants a handout. It's not a handout. We're talking about people who have long ties to the United States, who have worked here, who have paid their taxes. Most immigrants, most undocumented immigrants, they pay their taxes. They may not have a social security card, but they pay with international tax ID numbers. They've been here, and it's not like, people will say, well, why don't they just get in line and do it legally? That's a great question, but we don't have a legal line. I'm here to tell you that the legal line that they have is completely inadequate, and it's a joke. You take somebody, so for example, if you take somebody from India, I've got plenty of clients like this who are renowned physicians. Let's take an anesthesiologist or, gastroenterologist who's coming here and now working on the front lines in the medical and healthcare. And we know what that means. That means you're exposing, you're risking your life every day you go to work. Some of these folks have to, and they've been cleared, they go through the process where they're cleared. They're not taking a job from a U.S. worker. The Department of Labor says, no, this person is not taking a job from a U.S. worker. We need them. They have to wait sometimes 8, 9, 10 years. They have to stand in line. We have a shortage of nurses in this country. Everyone knows we have a shortage of registered nurses in this country, and that's been a problem for a long time. It's different in different pockets of the country. And that's wonderful. The Department of Labor it's not wonderful that we have a shortage, but what's wonderful is the Department of Labor has said, well, you know what? We recognize the shortage, so we're going to certify that nurses can come here. The Department of State then says, that's great. We don't have any visas. The law does not give us enough visas. So those nurses have to wait years and years and years before they can come here. So we got to fix the system. We've got to fix the law. So it's not about somebody not wanting to register. It's not as simple as going to the post office like when you get a passport. There is simply no line. There is no legal way to regularize your status for most people. There just isn't. And that needs to be fixed. That when they say there's a broken immigration system, that's what they mean.
I know you were saying that the Trump administration had been ignoring the Supreme Court decision for new applications. Have they been ignoring renewal applications also?
No, DACA renewals are still going through. I don't know the pace right now. I know we've gotten a few from some of our clients. We got one the other day, I think, yesterday. So they are going through. DACA renewals have always been going through. Now, look, there are other problems with legal immigration. The Trump administration has pretty much starved the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services of any cash, so that things have slowed down. We can go into theories as to why that's going on, but it is going on. But yeah, to answer your question directly, Robert, people can apply for renewals and they should apply for renewals. If their DACAs are expiring within the next 6 months, of course, get that renewal application in. If for no other reason, then if the Trump administration withdraws DACA, you will have a pending application. And if you have a pending application and it goes to court, you will probably be part of the group that's aggrieved because you have a pending application. So it's better to have that application pending, meaning having been filed, than to wait around.
I know you touched on this a little bit in your presentation, but what are the rights and considerations of non-U.S. citizens attending the rallies and protests that are going on?
Of non-U.S. citizens? You mean like permanent? Look, here's the thing. I mean, non-citizens right now in this country, at this moment in history, I don't care whether they're lawful permanent residents or whether they're undocumented. They need to be extremely vigilant when attending a rally, particularly if there's a danger of any kind of violence, whether that violence is perpetrated by, somebody who's protesting, which, by the way, appears to be very rare, or it's perpetrated by the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, I'm not, just watch what's going on in Portland, Oregon. The Department of Homeland Security, the agents of U.S. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, they're charged with guarding federal buildings. That's what they do under the statute. And they've been using that statute to go out into the streets and do a lot more than guard federal buildings. It's kind of been used as a pretext. Now, I'm editorializing here a little bit, but that's what's going on. And so if you're not a citizen, if you're a citizen, it's bad enough. There was that one poor guy, that big guy that was beaten up with a stick. He was a former Navy veteran. Robert shaking his head. I think you know what I'm talking about, that one guy. He was a U.S. citizen. He was a veteran. Now, if he was not a citizen, what's to say that he wasn't going to be charged with assaulting a federal officer? Now you've got a serious charge. And if you end up having to plead to any part of that charge, resisting, you could be facing deportation. You could be facing severe ramifications, severe consequences to your immigration status. So I'm not trying to scare people from protesting or expressing their views. That's the last thing I want you to take away from it. What I'm telling you is be careful, be vigilant, be careful. And you know, it's no different than, I'm going to sound like I'm everyone's dad here, but I'm very serious about this. It's no different than if you're not a citizen and you go to a party and there's drugs at that party and the cops are called and people are arrested and you are charged with possession. You are looking at deportation, automatic deportation in some cases. So it doesn't have to be a protest. It's almost any touching of a place where there's going to be illegality if you are connected to it. You know, and again, it's frustrating to even give this advice because we know that by and large, the people in the streets who are out there expressing anger over the murder of George Floyd and over the treatment of African Americans throughout the history of this country and want real change, they're doing the right thing. That's what's got to happen. This is a moment in history. So it's wonderful to be a part of that, in my view. But you also have to be careful. You have to be careful. You have to know what your vulnerabilities are. It probably doesn't help. That answer is probably not very practical. I mean, obviously, if we all stay home and hunker down, nothing happens. But you have to kind of gauge the risk, is I guess what I'm saying.
We got another question from chat, and I think this person must have been reading my mind because I was going to ask this question. Particularly since you said that it's important to have a plan, right? So the question is, what are some low cost or pro bono resources for people needing legal advice or resources? And that's what I was wondering, you know, getting some legal representation and making that part of their plan.
Yes, and thank you for that question because I should have affirmatively said something about it in my presentation. There are a number of places where you could seek to get pro bono representation or low cost, what we call low bono representation. One is, you know, there is Legal Aid Society. They may be limited in who they can represent. There are, you know, Catholic Charities in Cleveland does a wonderful job of representing undocumented folks. And I think what we were going to try to put together with the university was a list of lawyers that are members of the American Immigration Lawyers Association that may be able to assist. I can't speak for their pricing. Some would be different prices than others, but hopefully on a more reasonable fee basis or a low bono basis. I will tell you this, in selecting a lawyer, and I'm not doing this because I don't get, you know, any compensation or pay or reward or royalty because of my association with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, past president. But I would strongly recommend that if you're looking for an immigration lawyer, you go to the American Immigration Lawyers website. There is a lawyer search function there. Find one in your area, and should be somebody, in my opinion, that is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Why? Because even though that's not a guarantee of any kind of expertise, it is at least a demonstration that that attorney cares enough about the area to associate with the Bar Association. That means going to legal education, finding, you know, trying to keep up on the latest trends and that sort of thing. Regardless of whether or not that person, that lawyer, is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, when you choose a lawyer, you need to interview that lawyer. Don't choose the lawyer because they have the most flashy advertisement or because they make a promise. If a lawyer guarantees anything to you, then that's a cue that you should get up and walk out of that consultation because it's unethical to guarantee anything to anybody in the law. You know, you're all smart. You wouldn't be where you are today if you weren't smart. Use your gut. Do you trust this person? this person, don't go on just recommendations, make your own decision. It's not an easy decision. And therefore, I think what we would try to do at the university was offer a list of attorneys, and from that list you can choose. Unfortunately, there is no right to paid counsel in immigration proceedings. There is no Sixth Amendment right to counsel because they're not considered criminal proceedings, they're considered civil proceedings. That said, again, if Biden gets elected, my guess is that there will be some proposals, whether or not they pass Congress or whether or not he can do it by executive order, to have at least some level of compensation of paid counsel. That's not today. I know in Cleveland there's also a fund, but this mainly goes to unaccompanied minors, so I don't know that it would qualify students. I think the best thing to do is if you do feel you need an immigration lawyer, ask around, talk to people you trust, and make a smart, informed decision.
Will you recommend doing that now as part of your plan? Or
if you can, yeah, I think so. I think it's good for anybody who is undocumented or with DACA to sit down with an immigration attorney and get a sense of what your status is. What are your options? Look, there's no one size fits all, right? People came to the country in different ways. People wound up undocumented in different ways. Some people came in over the border with their parents. Others came here legally and their status ran out. Everybody's situation is different. So it's really important to sort of sit down with a lawyer, 1 hour consultation, get an idea as to what your options are and what they may be if DACA is withdrawn. And it's also important if, many of us have made mistakes growing up. If you have any kind of brush with the law, make sure that the lawyer knows about it so that they can properly advise you.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Maria, do you have another question before we get ready to wrap up? I'm assuming that's a no. So, but feel free to chime in. So let me ask this, David. Do you have a sense of whether there might be any legislative movement in this area if Biden is elected? I think that now, even though Democrats control the House, and they might be able to move a bill forward, but it won't matter because you can't get it signed and it may not get through the Senate. But is there any sense that we know of any congressmen or women or senators who may be thinking about immigration policy right now that'll be perched to move if Biden is elected?
The answer is yes, direct yes. Joe Biden, Vice President Biden on his website and elsewhere has committed to offering a bill in Congress on immigration reform on day one. Now, day one could mean the first month or whatever, but what he's saying is he's going to do, that's going to be a priority. So the Vice President is committed, Vice President Biden is committed to offering immigration reform legislation. And on his website, what he says is that immigration reform legislation, the bill, will include Dreamers, DACA, will include their parents, will include other undocumented immigrants with ties to the United States, will reform, make modernization reforms to the visa system. Pretty much a comprehensive plan. The plan itself is not out. I haven't seen it. The Democratic platform is going to be released this evening at 6 p.m. My understanding is that it's going to have pretty broad immigration recommendations. And so, yes, I think it's pretty clear that the Biden administration is going to make immigration a priority. Look, if nothing else, Robert, in the last 3.5 years, we've seen the country closed off to Muslims. We've seen the president who disparages African countries. He calls them shithole countries. We've seen children in cages, locked up in cages. We've seen families separated, children never to be returned to their parents. We've seen people stopped at the border and denied the right to ask for asylum, which is pretty much why the country was founded, as a safe haven. We've seen internally mass roundups and families destroyed and torn asunder. And now we've seen a government which has cynically used the COVID-19 crisis, the tragedy of this international pandemic, to cut out many of the immigration rights, the right to come here, the right to apply for asylum. They don't even use the asylum law anymore to deny people asylum. They use the health law. As absurd as that is, because though I don't have the specific number, the percentages of folks who are at the southern border who are COVID-19 positive is far lower than the percentages, say, in some of most of the southern border states or even throughout the United States. So it's being used cynically. We've seen the president who whispers, there's a guy named Stephen Miller who whispers in his ear, and we've seen some of the most draconian policies. So, I think it's time. I think many Americans think it's time. We've seen how essential immigrants are to this country. Like I said before, many of them are keeping us healthy and keeping us alive on the front lines during this pandemic. So hopefully, again, the silver lining is that America will, and by the way, Americans have always, by and large, supported immigration reform to about 60%, 60 to 70%, I think, are the figures. So Americans are behind it. The question is, can we get a Congress and a president that will put pen to paper?
You're here. Well, with that, David, we want to thank you so much for generously sharing your time and your wisdom with us. We're so grateful to you. You're definitely on one of our favorite alum lists, and we appreciate everything. My co-facilitator, Maria Luisa, thank you as well. Davey, who kept us moving with our technology. And I will close with this. I think it is underscored that if we really want to see improvements in immigration policy, those of you who are listening and watching, please vote. Go to the polls and understand what policies, not just looking at the president, but throughout, for Congress, for Senate, your local elections, all of those decisions impact things like immigration policy and the areas that affect our lives. So I encourage us all to become engaged civically so that we can be the change we wish to see in our country.
Absolutely.
With that, I thank you all, and we will sign off.